International programs. He's been intimately involved in support for training programs in rule law for Mexican officials, police, investigators, judges. I had the pleasure of attending one of those trainings late last year in Santa Fe. I was very impressed with what the Council of State Governments is doing in the United States to support state governments in Mexico. It's really a fascinating, exciting element of the U.S. strategy to support Mexico. But he's also been involved and supported us as a partner in focusing on this issue of the social and economic elements of the violence and the conflict in Mexico. And so we're delighted that Edgar is with us today, all the way from Sacramento. A real sacrifice to come all the way across. And thank you. And he's going to have some remarks of his own and then chair the panel with the rest of our presenters. Thank you. And I just want to remind people there are people on the webcast. That's why we keep insisting on people using the microphones, even though we can hear each other in this room. But it's important for those on the internet. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And I want to thank the Woodrow Wilson Center for putting together this panel and this forum. As Eric mentioned, I'm with the Council of State Governments West in Sacramento, California. We're a nonprofit organization that primarily focuses on Western state legislatures, although we do have a national and regional component in the Midwest, East, and South. Out of all the regions of the Council of State Governments, the Western region has the benefit of having both a northern border with Canada and also a southern border with Mexico that allows us to have some unique international programs that we conduct and that we've been developing over the course of the last few years. This panel obviously is regarding on the implementation efforts of the Pillar 4 strategy that was just discussed in the previous panel. Just to give you just a general sense on the work that we've been doing, and then I'll pass it along to the panelists here. One of the programs that we've evolved over the course of the last few years is called the U.S.-Mexico State Alliance Partnership. It's a program that it's a collaborative, multi-branch partnership that it's aimed at strengthening the role of state officials and institutions in both the United States and Mexico. It promotes and convenes binational exchanges and workshops among legislators, state legislators, attorney generals, state treasurers, lieutenant governors, local officials, and academic and policy institutions from both countries. And again, it's all aimed at enhancing the role of state and local officials in addressing shared public policy concerns that transcend international borders. To achieve this, we have partnered with several actors in this effort. And here I put up I couldn't blow it up the whole thing, but basically here you have kind of the list of the different partners. This is funded through USAID Mexico, and the partners that you see there obviously is CWAG, the Conference of Western Attorney Generals. They are the ones that promote and not only the bilateral collaboration among attorney generals, state attorney generals from both countries, but also the capacity training for forensic scientists, prosecutors, and judges that is occurring as part of the different changes in state laws in Mexico. The National Association of State Treasurers, NAST, they are our partner in promoting exchanges between officials in Mexico. I'm talking about how do you fund infrastructure projects at the local and state level, because in our states, primarily the state treasurers have that know-how on the bonding and how do you achieve those kinds of issues. The National Lieutenant Governors Association, NLGA, they are involved in exchanges with, even though there's no lieutenant governors equivalent in Mexico, they do work with their tourism partners to look at strategies on economic competitiveness, tourism kind of efforts. The Paso del Norte group, which is our new partner, and I'll talk a little more about them shortly, is the PDN. They're based out of El Paso, and they focus on the Pillar 4 efforts. The Woodrow Wilson Center and also Arizona State University, University's North American Center for Transborder Studies are kind of the research arm of all of these efforts. And the idea is, how do you take concepts or strategies that have been discussed either through our legislative conference, through our attorney general forums or treasurer components, and not only get the research that is useful for policymakers, but how do you then take those and achieve results? We've had some successes on issues of waste tires, for example, where we had, through research that was done, and then turned into legislation, and particularly Senator Chucheni was in the Senate. She was in California. We had some successes on human trafficking. And also now we're working on renewable energy efforts. So again, these are efforts of how do you take concepts to action, develop the laws and the regulations to promote these efforts. The other component of this is, how do you work with other binational actors, like the Border Governors Conference, which is in a forum that's existed for over 25 years. And so working and trying to strengthen that state legislative executive branch cooperation, but also working with the U.S.-Mexico Interparliamentary Group and others that obviously are federal and are critical players in all of the efforts that are trying to be achieved by all of our partners. There was discussion in the earlier panel about the leveraging, and I can tell you that from this program, particularly the Attorney General program, the leveraging of resources, some state resources, is very significant. When you look at the time that prosecutors, because the funding only covers their travel to and from events, but that doesn't cover the time that they're spending a week or 2 weeks and sometimes on some of the capacity training, and as well as judges. So there's that leveraging, and kind of this kind of effort brings together these unique synergies that and networks that promote collaboration at a very multi-jurisdictional level. The efforts, as it was discussed earlier, in March of 2010, U.S. Secretary Clinton and Mexico's Foreign Minister Patricia Espinosa outlined the Renewed Merida Initiative with the four-pillar approach, which obviously among them is the strengthening and creating of resilient border communities. As a result, both countries emphasized and committed major resources to the region, particularly to the Juarez-El Paso region. At that point, USAID reached out to the Council of State Governments to begin discussions as a possible partner that can be incorporated into the alliance partnership that could undertake some efforts in that region, again with the aim of developing strong, resilient border communities. So with the support of AID and the vision of some of our BLC members from the region, we commenced a dialogue with PDN. And the PDN is a nonprofit organization comprised of business and community leaders that aims at promoting economic and social well-being of the El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, and Las Cruces areas, which is we call the Metroplex there. And one of the fundamental objectives of these local exchanges was to create and promote not only the resilient border community, but also lasting binational mechanisms of cooperation that integrate the local regional policy objectives to the state and federal decision makers, and building upon existing partnerships that exist in the area. So it's creating a bottom-up approach of developing local regional solutions and recommendations that can be strategically linked with the state and federal policy mechanisms. This included the identification of programs or projects, prioritization on multi-year plans, 21st century borders, enhancing economic competitiveness, strengthening institutions, and again, building stronger communities. In that process, there ensued several meetings, planning meetings with several local officials, not only to get their buy-in in the process, but to also convince them that it was a serious effort. It was discussed in the previous panel about some of the violence that's been occurring there, Also the economic downturn, where you had a large number of inhabitants that left. So, and also the issue of the distrust of many citizens there, of their government institutions, and of having the ability to combat organized crime, but also to being able to shape a sustainable community. However, with the leadership of different stakeholders, including the PDN, the University of Texas in El Paso, the Office of Congressman Reyes, former State Senator Elliot Chapley, and others from Ciudad Juarez, they began developing momentum and discussions and of how this can be achieved. This culminated with two events last August that were back-to-back. One was the Foro de Construcción Comunitaria in Ciudad Juarez, as well as the Border Security Conference, which was held in conjunction with Congressman Reyes and UTEP, the University of Texas at El Paso. And these events provided an opportunity to highlight regional initiatives and how they're intended to strengthen the competitiveness of the region. And even though the security conference traditionally had been more about security, it integrated other elements of the Pillar 4 strategy. After that meeting, there continued to be and continues to be a lot of collaboration to achieve economic sustainability and what the region must do to attract investment in high-skilled labor, especially value-added jobs. One of the continued elements of it is the model ports concept, which is aimed at streamlining trade and reducing costs for private sector. Basically, the idea that enforcement and trade go hand in hand, and working closely with Customs and Border Protection on identifying modeling flow of traffic along the border, evaluate infrastructure, personnel and operations at the ports of entry, and just making those ports of entry more efficient so that trade could move effectively along the region. This has continued. There's also efforts on renewable energy, on workforce development by the PDN. There's also a feasibility study on an alternative energy certification center in the Paso del Norte region. There's efforts to develop a small business center that supports not only constituents in the El Paso region, but also Juarez. There's also been exchanges of best practices. There was folks from Juarez that attended meetings in Tijuana and looking at Tijuana Innovadora, which was a 15-day event on looking at how the business community, in partnership with others, can look at ways to enhance its involvement in these efforts. So again, these are ongoing efforts of how to make the border, much more efficient. 21st century border crossings and other programs. Since May of 2010, which is when certainly the funding for Pillar 4 efforts, at least through our program, what we've seen is it served as a catalyst to address regional strategies and promote innovation, entrepreneurship, social and cultural development in the regions. The efforts by the Paso del Norte group demonstrate that support for regional community efforts can lead to a bottom-up approach that can integrate the existing federal programs or policies and not only help develop a common vision, but also promote real results for the region. Ultimately, though, it does take the regional local leadership to bring everyone together and develop a process where everyone is at the table, contributing and feeling they're part of the solution. This is not always easy, given that you have competing demand at the local regional efforts, concerns over security, and uncertainty of definitely funding in the future for these kinds of efforts. So in a nutshell, that's kind of some of the efforts that we've been involved with in the Pillar 4 strategy. So with that, I'd like to introduce the panelists for this panel on border regional perspectives on Pillar 4 implementation efforts. The first will be Senator Ducheney, and I'll read off a little bit of their bios. Senator Duchesne served over 14 years in the California State Legislature, representing districts which border Baja California, Mexico, from 1994 to 2000 as a member of the State Assembly, and from 2002 to 2010 as a member of the State Senate. In the Senate, her district encompassed all of the Baja California border from Imperial Beach, where she and her husband reside, to the Colorado River along the California-Arizona border. During her legislative service, in addition to chairing the Budget Committee for 4 years in each house, she chaired the Select Committee to promote California-Mexico cooperation. She was the founding chair of CSG's Western Southern Border Committee, which eventually evolved to the Border Legislative Conference, which she also chaired in 2009-2010. She also spearheaded 10 meetings of the Legislative Forum of the Three Californias from 2003 to 2010. This is a forum of state legislators from the California, Baja California, and Baja California Sur to discuss issues of common concern. Senator Duchesne had previously served as member of the Governmental Advisory Committee to the NAFTA-created CEC and presently serves as honorary co-chair of the Border Innovations Awards project sponsored by the Woodrow Wilson Institute. Senator Duchesne holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in History from the Pomona College and a JD from Southwestern University School of Law in Los Angeles. Prior to her service in the state legislature, she was an elected member of the San Diego Community College Board District and managed solo practice with primary focus in areas of immigration and family law. The second panelist will be Carlos Antonio Arce. Carlos is the program director for the Youth Work Mexico. He joined the International Youth Foundation in 2010 after working for 20 years as a social development specialist in the Inter-American Development Bank, both in Washington, D.C., as well as Trinidad and Tobago, Paraguay, and Brazil. He possesses an ideal blend of experience in social safeguards, youth engagement, and public administration projects. Prior to the IADB, Carlos worked as a consultant with the United Nations Development Program and the Organization of American States. He possesses tested experience mentoring public sector and civil society leaders at the national, sub-regional, and local levels. His partnership with IYF goes back to 1996 when he worked on the initial conceptualization of the Entra 21 program, which is IYF's flagship employability initiative. He holds a bachelor's in economics and a master's of arts in Latin American studies, both from the University of Texas at Austin. He also holds a master's degree in public affairs from the Lyndon Johnson School of Public Affairs, as well as postgraduate certification from Harvard University, and was born in Bolivia and fluent in both English and Spanish, Portuguese, and obviously English. And our third speaker in the panelist is Lucinda Vargas, who's the director of the Center for Strategic International Economic Integration, a research center she launched in 2010 aimed at promoting international integration in strategic areas that advance transnational economic growth and development. From 2001 to March 2010, she was the director of Plan Estratégico de Juárez. She currently serves on the organization's board and executive committee. Prior to this position, she was a senior economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas El Paso branch. Her professional experience also includes positions as senior economist at CIMEX, WEFA, and as research associate at the U.S. Treasury Department and at UT El Paso Center for Inter-American and Border Studies. She has a bachelor's degree in economics from UT El Paso and a master's degree in economics from Penn State University. She is currently pursuing a doctorate in economic development at New Mexico State University. And Lucinda Vargas is a U.S.-Mexico border native, born in El Paso and raised in Juárez. So those are our three panelists, and I'd like to start off with former Senator Denise Duchesne. Denise. Oh.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's great to walk in and see so many people actually interested in having this conversation. Let me just start with one of my favorite. But Tip O'Neill, once upon a time, always reminded us that all politics is local. And when you start looking at some of these issues, and I just want to put a little context based on the prior panel and some of the things we're doing, but you know, all of these issues for a long time have been struggles of local governments. I was listening to people talk about what you're trying to do with the drugs, and I remembered as a local government, as a state government official, as a local community college trustee, the kinds of fights, these things aren't new. And there's a lot of reinventing the wheel that starts to happen, and suddenly, because it's international or because we're trying to work with Mexico, somehow it's different than fighting drugs on the streets of San Diego, Los Angeles, or Detroit. It just isn't. The fight is the same fight we've had in San Diego, that we have in Los Angeles, that you have today in Washington or Detroit. Any other U.S. city has had that same struggle with the gangs and the cartels and the whole. The comment that made me think about it was the gentleman in the back of the room, because I remember one of the things that is most frustrating to somebody who serves in city or as a community member is this whole notion that, the drug dealer has the best looking car in the neighborhood. And that is not unique to Mexico. It has been a problem in U.S. cities for a long, long time. It remains a problem. And how do you explain to folks that the school is the oldest building in the neighborhood? Right? The elementary school especially. I mean, it was built in 1952 and nobody's looked at it since. And somehow the drug dealer, he's got this fancy car, he's got a nice house, and we're trying to tell them you need to go to school and make $30,000 like the teacher instead of $300,000 like the drug dealer. How does that work in the real world? But it's not unique. And I think it's important for folks to take those experiences and we need to translate them, and it's a lot of what people are now trying to do in Juarez and throughout Mexico, but it is not a struggle that they haven't already been engaged in at some level that local governments and state governments been thinking about for a long time. This question of youth, education, all of those things. But what's unique in the border area is that these suddenly have binational, transnational, international consequences and dimensions to these discussions. There is no drug dealer in Tijuana that doesn't live in San Diego, or vice versa. I mean, that doesn't have a house, that doesn't have a family, that doesn't move back and forth in some fashion. So there is no drug dealing in Tijuana that doesn't hurt San Diego. So to say that there's violence in Tijuana or violence in Juarez and somehow, but it's in Mexico, which is a common perspective, unfortunately, and I think a lot of the country, that Mexico is violent. Well, all of that impacts those of us who live in these metropolitan binational regions. And it creates a sort of a different perspective. I also sort of need to do, I'll get to the BLC experience, because I think one of the things we've also learned, we were so excited last year when we were in Mexico City the week before Secretary Clinton came and did the announcement with Secretary Espinosa about the Pillar 4, the Merida 2 initiatives, and we happened to be at the embassy right when the press release became publicly available, so we could find out that it was going to happen in 3 days or so. For those of us who were this was a trip of the border legislators, and annually the border legislators now go to Washington, D.C. and to Mexico City. And to have everybody sort of all of a sudden wake up and say what we've been saying for 10 years was wonderful. I mean, several of us in the room had been sort of trying to get folks to focus on, look, these issues can only be solved at the local and regional level. The solutions will come out of the local and the region. Yes, we need federal support. Yes, we need federal facilitation. Yes, the federal government has to be part of these things. But the solutions for many years have been starting to come from the local level. But I have to say, in 1996 or 7 or so, when we first had a committee on the southern border in CSG, which has become this wonderful Border Legislators Conference, when we first called people together, nobody knew anybody. And even within Mexico, what we found was when we called the meeting and people came, the state legislators from Nuevo León had never met the state legislators from Baja California. Never. Okay. We now have mechanisms in place where they are communicating with each other more because of these mechanisms, as we do 10 states things. What we also found over time, and with the support of USAID, was that when you set it up so that we had dedicated staff and a real program director who could visit every state, who could spend full time dealing with it, suddenly you could really take this to a new level. When you have a bunch of legislators who frankly have, a lot of demands on their time in every which direction, asking us to sort of organize it, which we did for a while, is just a challenge, and your staffs have other duties, and it's just hard. And we did it, and that's how much people wanted that discussion. That's how badly state legislators in all the different states said, yeah, we really need to have this conversation. And we had to invent the first directory of, how to find the phone number and who's elected and that sort of thing. And the importance of it in the border, and particularly in the Mexico border context, is also the no reelection problem, which at a local government level, as confidence has built over the last several years in the Mexican electoral system, and as confidence and transparency has improved, that this 3-year turnover is a major barrier to sustainability. And so the challenge with many of these border mechanisms is always how to get it to outlive the personal relationship that one of us builds at whatever level, whether it's a city mayor or council member or state legislator. A lot of those, the positive things are built off of personal relationships, but how do you get a mechanism that can survive no reelection or term limits, as we have in some of our states as well? That's the challenge, is creating these mechanisms that can sobrevivir, survive. And so we do have some models for these things that go along. Now I do my sort of uniquely California. All right, now what do I do here? I am not a competent tech. Which direction do I point this? What do I do with it?
The right.
Yeah. This one? Okay. This is my California disclaimer. All right. This map is real. It is the 1650 Spanish idea of what it looked like. They hadn't explored the Gulf of California yet, so they didn't understand that it ended at the Colorado River and didn't kind of really be an ocean. So they called it the island of California. But that island goes to Cabo. It doesn't stop at San Diego. We do have, and it's sort of a disclaimer for a lot of this cross-border discussions, but California is unique. Texas is large, and it has different uniqueness in terms of having so many different borders and bordering multiple states. But California, just as Texas in some ways and some other states, we stand as the size of a nation. Sometimes we feel like we are that island, as removed as we are from Washington. But it is a large state, and it creates a different border. And for any of you who aren't kind of from there, it's always important to kind of recognize San Diego, Tijuana is the largest metropolitan region on the border. It has the most border crossings of any border crossing in the entire world on an annual basis. We have if you haven't been there, I know people that, even the ambassador, Pascual, when he first went there, was shocked. I mean, people have trouble comprehending a border crossing with 24 lanes going in one direction. That is... And we are now expanding that by 6 because we need more, because it still takes 2 hours. With 2 century lanes, with 24 lanes going north, we still takes 2 hours to cross the border on a lot of days. And that costs the San Diego economy $3 billion a year. We have done the numbers. We have, done the studies. It's just, when it doesn't matter which city you talk about, when one side sneezes, the other one catches the cold. When we have an economic downturn in the United States, Tijuana and Rosarito and Ensenada suffer. When we have an economic downturn in Mexico, when there is violence in Tijuana, tourism in San Diego suffers. When people have to wait more than 45 minutes to cross the border to eat dinner, restaurant business suffers. Shopping business suffers. And the entire economy of the region suffers. This is true in other places too, but we are sort of uniquely large. And so when folks talk about us, they tend to talk about San Diego, Tijuana. But we are a longer border than that, and we encompass rural areas, Mexicali, Calexico, Imperial County. And what's unique about sort of this whole region is also that Baja California is, first of all, one of the most prosperous states in Mexico. And all of its population, for probably 90% of its population, lives within 100 miles of the border. All of their 5 municipios are based within 100 miles of the border. They're right on the border. And it has a lot of land after that, but not a lot of people. It's desert. And then you get down to Baja Sur, and they oppositely, their population is concentrated in Cabo and La Paz, right? So you have this sort of truncated animal, not unlike California, which is San Diego. Where are we? San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, right? Just about the same distance, surprisingly. San Diego is actually kind of equidistant from Oregon to Cabo, give or take. It creates a sort of a different sense of region. So when folks talk to us about Pillar 4, and we talked about, particularly, obviously, everybody's first focus was Juarez. Juarez and El Paso, Los Cruces just have this humongous need but they used to be our model. 10 years ago, El Paso Juarez was a model for local government cross-border cooperation, air quality districts, water quality things. I mean, Juarez, El Paso was a lot of models that everybody was using. Obviously, their social fabric has just been hugely disrupted over the last few years. And so the last other uniquely California piece of this is that nobody wants to pay attention to us because we aren't in meltdown. And yet, prevention is really the game here. As Secretary Napolitano, when she came shortly after she was appointed, came to San Diego for a meeting, and she said, we get that you are not having quite the same level of violence and problems here as other parts of the border, and we want to keep it that way. And that would certainly be the fervent hope of everybody who is in local government in those areas. Certainly we have our violence. Certainly we have, we continue to have issues with drug cartels. But our level of cooperation, our level of trust, and our level of confidence between law enforcement officials and local government folks and mechanisms that still work and that are functioning at a non-governmental level is very high relative to many other parts of the border at the moment in time. We weren't always ahead, but we have managed to survive this episode in better shape on that level than many other parts of the border who had great relationships but just have been disrupted. It puts us in a little bit different place than some of the others. So I say all that as a preface to sharing sort of our perspective on how we look at this. So folks came to us and said, they came to the BLC and they came and said, we want to do local initiatives. We get it now. Pillar 4, marry the two, local border crossings, things that we had been writing papers on for 10 years. And we want to do this, and we want to focus on El Paso, Juarez, and San Diego, Tijuana. And I said, well, San Diego, Tijuana, that's interesting, but that isn't where we are. We don't work that way. Our region is different. And our region, we cannot leave out Imperial County and Mexicali and Tecate. We cannot leave out Ensenada, and frankly, we can't leave out Cabo and La Paz. Because if you want security and prosperity in our region, we have to defend the entire region, the island. This is just sort of the quick resume of some of the things that have already been going on. We had a commission of the Californias, the three Californias, since 1964. In honesty, it hasn't met since 1994, when Governor Wilson supported the 187 initiative. We tried to revive it in the late 90s. It sort of didn't happen. The Border Governors Conference, obviously, is ongoing. We did have an Office of California-Mexico Affairs. It's been a victim of budget cuts. And the legislative forum of the three Californias was really our effort as legislators to get around the fact that the Commission of the Californias and the three governors hadn't met since 1994. So in 2002, some of us got together, and it goes back to this vision that the rest of the world, both in Mexico and in the U.S., don't always get. But we think Baja Sur is part of our region. And the fact that it's a different state and that it technically doesn't have a border with the United States doesn't make them not part of the Baja Peninsula and therefore part of the region. And so the three state legislatures came together, and we have started meeting in 2003. We met 10 times over 7 years. Again, surviving 2 or 3 different elections in each state, which is always a challenge. So at the local level, we had offices that also have fallen apart, but the COBRO been victims of budget cuts and such. But the COBRO has survived, and this has been a big one. It was started through the work of the embassies, or the consuls in Tijuana and San Diego, and it has maintained, and it is a strong binational mechanism which works a lot on all of the local government issues. And SANDAG San Diego Association of Governments, Area Association of Governments, has had for some time a borders committee, and for many, long time, has had Tijuana essentially as an unofficial member of the San Diego Regional Government Association, because, again, we can't function. It doesn't work for us to build a road without checking in with Tijuana and where are they building the parallel road. We had that experience. We are still building the freeway to the truck crossing that was built for NAFTA in 1995. We had all the plans. California was ready, except there were no roads going there from anywhere. And the federal government built the crossing in this wonderful place, except there were no roads really of significance going there from either Tijuana or from California. And we are still building the freeway coming out of there. I mean, we've improved the system a lot over the last 15 years, but we never got we're still working on the actual freeway that should have been there to begin with. It's one of the first meetings I ever had in the Mexican embassy 15 years ago, was saying, excuse me, but could you checked in with the state before you built the thing to figure out how we're going to build the road, you know? In our area, academic, again, sort of the model, the BLC, building a research partnership with NACS, with Woodrow Wilson, with others. In our region, we have a lot of academic resources that's been going on for a long time, and there has been a lot of regional research. COLEF, obviously, UABC, UCSD, San Diego State, all of them have been part of it. And in particular, San Diego State has focused on the region, the California's region, in some of their work, working with UABC and UABC. They have, at one point, not too long ago, we actually had a Trans-Border Public Administration program with UABC. It sort of lost its joint nature. It never quite got to be a joint degree, which is what we originally envisioned. But we are now looking to sort of bring it back with this new initiative. I put these up just to show examples that these things exist organically. Now how do we harness them, and how do we bring it back together? These are, oops, let's see. Oops. Oh, I haven't been doing this. I've been doing the slides and not moving it for you. I'm sorry. All right. Part of this is also because I don't know what time in San Diego, but I'm not awake. I came in on the red eye, so it's but the studies that have been done, and it's to show we really have some of the basis for this. Now, how do we go to the next level? This was one of the original things we did, was trying to map without, that little tiny dotted line is the political border, which nobody understands. The Tijuana River watershed is really a very interesting example of why it's a region and why you can't do anything on one side that doesn't help or hurt the other. You have to deal with the watershed as a watershed. You can't clean up the Tijuana River Valley in San Diego if you don't start where the watershed starts in the mountains. And the mountains are on both sides of the border. And so in a series of projects, the first sort of atlases that started to do this dotted line thing and stop, a lot of times you see maps, they just stop at the border. You ever seen those? It's just like, what's on the other side? Blank. Right. This whole notion of designing maps, so then Sandag started doing, we now have land use maps that show the entire cross-border region. It shows you where zoning is agricultural and but we finally had to do these satellite maps to get people to realize where's the region. It doesn't stop at the political border. So the watershed maps were some of the first ones of those. We did posters and atlases and a lot of work. There's a Tijuana Estuary visitor center on the U.S. side that explores some of these things, and a lot of work's been done in that area. The fence created a lot of turmoil in some of the work that had been done to improve that watershed, but we're coming back around. Another example, it was a book that they've done, a research work on Loreto. A lot of this has to do with urban planning, sustainable development, economic development, ecotourism. How do you do this? So this study provided baseline information and analysis to help local government officials address their community issues as Loreto tried to build. Where are you going to get the water? Where are you going to get the electricity? How do you think about recreation? How do you develop and get bigger without destroying your quality of life, right? They've done similar work for Tecate, and also we did one some time ago on the Imperial and Mexicali valleys. This was more of a monographs series that we did in 2002 or 3, I think it was published. Has history, culture, a lot of the things. The introduction that I wrote for this says, 2 valleys, 2 nations, 1 region, 1 river. 1 river, Colorado River, that all of us are dependent on. We may be 2 valleys, but it's 1 big agricultural region. All of you from the East Coast who eat lettuce in the winter, that's where it comes from. So why would we do this? Obviously for all of the above. Take advantage of the cultural and economic and quality of life issues. We cannot address these environmental insecurity and disasters, social problems, public health. The disasters, when San Diego has a fire, when Mexicali has an earthquake, it's all one big area that has issues. And the impact of that, how do we deal with those things? We would have San Diego's 2007 fire, it was Tijuana Power that kept us from blacking out at one point one day. The earthquake last year in Mexicali has impacted the entire region, and we need to bring their agriculture back to life for all of us to survive. So it led us to our sort of next days trying to get ourselves into that more sustainable mode to hold a meeting a couple weeks ago and bring together, and we actually have former elected officials like myself and current city council members and elected officials and formers and citizens of the border region of the 3 states who share this vision. And we've come together and we propose basically an institute of the 3 Californias to formalize these governmental relationships between ourselves and beyond the things that are already happening between non-governmental and economic development and chambers of commerce kind of relations to focus a bit on this question of governmental relations and how we do that. So our shared vision is that we are one ecological and economic region. We cannot really, the security and the prosperity of the entire region is dependent on all of the other parts working. Doesn't work to say San Diego's secure, we don't have to worry, Doesn't work that way, because we are not secure. So long as there is a possibility of a threat, whether it's natural threat, whether it's an economic threat, whether it's a health threat, as long as that threat exists in Cabo or Tijuana, San Diego is not secure. It's as simple as that, and vice versa. So if we are threatened, and we are a naval port, we have, when they're on terrorism alert, trust me, San Diego gets it first. All the major naval ships are there. We have big defense presence. We have a nuclear power plant. All of those things have potential impacts in Tijuana, Rosarito, Ensenada, all the way down the coast. On the Pacific Ocean, there are 3 things that we share in common: Pacific Ocean, the Gulf of California, dependence on the Colorado River, that we live in areas, we have all of these millions of people living where God did not intend them to live, because otherwise he would have put water there. And areas that actually have incredible opportunities for renewable energy resources. We have geothermal on both sides of the border. We have wind projects now that are crossing the border. We have solar, all over the place. We have real opportunities on renewable energy, and we have opportunities in ecotourism. All of us are tourism-dependent states. People don't think always of California that way, but it is our number 2 industry. And actually, one of the other things people forget about California is that our number 1 industry, everybody knows about biotech and movies and such. The number 1 industry in California is still agriculture, and the number 2 industry is tourism. So movies come next, and they're right there, but, and biotech is obviously on the rise, and high tech. So this is our sense of who we are. And it is a shared vision, and that's why the 3 of us, we brought people together from all 3 states who really share that sense and that concept. Our purpose is, in fact, to build strong and resilient communities, consistent with the Pillar 4 initiative. But we want to facilitate best practices. Again, we all know we had a city councilman call the other day from a new city councilman in one of the Baja states. You know, where do I go to find, how do I go see the recreation program that they're doing in this city in California? What do we do to facilitate and build on those kind of relationships? How do we build sister city relationships? How do we build youth programs? Chula Vista has been doing this locally with Rosarito for a while, probably doesn't even know there's an opportunity to do that on a broader scale. You know, people do these things kind of at the local level, but how do you hook people up? And that was our first challenge when I first got elected was, well, how do I find my counterparts in Baja California? How do I find out what they're doing in Juarez and Nuevo León and how they're making that work? That's how you get to tires and air quality and water quality issues. So at our meeting earlier this month, our consensus was to, in fact, move forward. Baja and Baja California Sur want to establish their own nonprofits to facilitate this relationship of an institute that is, again, sort of outside of the government, sort of get outside of some of the day-to-day politics, which can be very messy in some of these states. And to be able to say, let's call people together and to as a convener, a facilitator, because our experience, again, with BLC and other forums is we do better when the outside entity with direction from the public policy folks, what do you want to know, where do you want to go, but when the outside entity can actually convene the meeting and have the resources. Again, we've had the fortunate support of USAID, but we've always had support then, matching support at the local level, whether it's businesses or governments to support travel, to support receptions, to support the ongoing work of these things. And you need this academic component. So, we agreed on a mission statement. We're moving as best as we can, sort of, again, limping along, trying to start a new thing. And our priority projects, at least that our sense right now is to focus on disaster preparedness. We know the memorandum's still floating around in Washington Netherworld someplace between the Board of Governors, or Mexico Netherworld. Some federal government someplace is still sitting on the Board of Governors protocol for disaster preparedness. But at the local level, it's real. How do we get cities and counties prepared? And how do we do communities? How do we have communities prepared to respond to these disasters? We want to build capacity in the public sector professionals. We are very aware of what's going on with the attorney generals and all of that. San Diego, one of the reasons Tijuana is so strong has been so resilient right now is because they started a long time ago changing the way their local police are done. It's a much more community-based policing. They did a lot to start to professionalize their police force some years ago, and a lot of that was done in cooperation with San Diego. The focus of this group is really to look at local government and state government professionals, the people that are your planners, that are that core of folks. So we want to reinstate on a 3-state basis these programs and train everybody in a binational way for public administration. Who are we going to have be these government folks? And we want to look at some of these quality of life indicators. One of the other studies that I didn't put up there that was done was quality of life on the border. We have some of those indicators baseline. How do we keep that going? And how do we bring in Baja Sur, which hasn't always been part of it, except through these studies, the Loreto. The next study that's actually coming out was development in Los Cabos that SDSU and OVCS have been working on. So we have a goal to meet again in the fall, to continue this and to try to establish some kind of a work plan. Obviously, we are funding deficient. And looking for opportunities to figure it out. But I think, we felt the obligation to come together and try to figure out who we are and what are we trying to do before we went too much farther. So we were able to hold this meeting with support of the BLC and others. San Diego State Foundation has been part of it. We were able to get a little bit of support from California government entities, although they are still in budget crisis. But it's sort of our vision of our region That again isn't always the vision that the federal government would call a region. They get the San Diego-Tijuana part now, but the notion that it really is Eureka to Cabo, 2,000 miles of Pacific coastline, is a lot harder for folks to grasp, but it is how we see who we are. So.
Thank you, Denise. In the interest of time, we'll hold the questions after our third speaker. So now I'll yield the floor to Mr. Carlo Arce.
Hello? That's fine. Good. I just spent a week in San Diego and Los Angeles, and I'm a little discouraged that the problems are somewhat similar to what we're facing in Ciudad Juarez. Discouraged because with the social safety net that California has and the resources that these counties have, they're still running into the same problems that we're facing as well. So it really is there is a need to change the paradigm in terms of how to find out or design a roadmap in terms of solutions that we need. And maybe part of it, I think the problem that I saw and I'm seeing in Ciudad Juarez, the commonality may be that there's now a reliance on government rather than people. People prefer to be indoors. People prefer to not socialize even with their neighbors. And it's the government. In Los Angeles, it's the government. I send my kids to school. It's their responsibility. And so we have to change that mindset that it's the government's responsibility in order to make some progress. YouthWork Mexico was created, designed back around those times of those meetings with Hillary Clinton and the Mexican government. From February to April of last year, we did a joint diagnostics with USAID. We realized that there were a lot of scattered initiatives, non-articulated, non-integral, non-holistic, non-comprehensive, just a lot of different NGOs following the money trail of what was coming down from the federal government, state government, or private sector, and really not following their own mission and their own vision on why they were created in the first place. In other words, money was not the solution. It actually contributed perhaps to part of the problem. So with regard to what immediate actions we could do, we realized that if we were going to get started, we had to get started and off the ground and running. Final approval came, I believe, on June 5th, and by July 1st, we had 1,630 kids in summer camps. The interesting part of the summer camp program last year that we coordinated with something called the Red de Centros de Aprendizaje y Convivencia, led by Casa PJ, Techo Comunitario, Organización Popular Independiente. There are about 7 or 8 organizations. I'm going to pass this YouthWork Mexico data sheet so that you all have a better glance of the program. But the interesting part of this summer camp was there's a census done in March. We already have one for this year. And it says that there are about 3,500 kids who are finishing 6th grade and are not continuing their education in secundaria, which would be 7th grade and above. And so these kids just go to the street. Why? Because most of the families either can't afford secundaria, don't really place a value on education. There's a myriad of reasons why. So we piloted a little group called La Transición. We had 200 kids from this group that we were able to insert about 165 of them into secondary school after the summer camp, thanks to the work of La Secretaría de Educación Pública and our joint efforts with them and Casa Promoción Juvenil, et cetera. This year, we're much more ambitious. Instead of 1,630, we're looking at 2,500 kids. Instead of 200 transition kids, we're looking at 700 kids in the transition program. And one of the targets will be this, we have a targeted, focalized, what is it called? It's a target intervention strategy in Ciudad Juarez around La Colonia Francisco Madero and 10 colonias that are adjacent to it. So we want to make sure that at least in that targeted intervention strategy being led by the municipality, but with the tremendous leadership and help of both Enrique, Adriana, and the rest of the old Todos Somos Juarez team, that at least there we can guarantee that 100% of the kids do have an after-school program, that the kids that aren't in school have an activity, whether it's sports, arts, whatever, that they actually have a meal. I mean, hunger is a new thing for Ciudad Juarez, but it's present now. So if we can offer opportunities, meals, and then integrate into those safe spaces some life skills programming, then maybe we can start making a dent. So after the summer, we initiated with Pechac an expansion of their after-school program. They had been working with 400 to 1,000 kids. We expanded to 2,400 kids and included the secundaria for the first time, which was not part of their model. We had over 1,000 kids in secundaria, which is 7th through 9th grade. And I think this is tremendously important because I was talking to Alejandro Villanueva, who's the regional director of Kellogg's in Mexico City, and also for all of Mexico. And I said, well, why are you in Chiapas? Kellogg's was actually our founding source for the International Youth Foundation 21 years ago. And why are you only in Chiapas? You have to come to Ciudad Juarez. We could really use your resources and knowledge. And he said, well, I've taken a look at the statistics in Ciudad Juarez, and you compare them to the educational achievement in rural areas in Chiapas, and you'll see that why we're in Chiapas, and we have to do an integrated intervention in Chiapas. And I said, if you compare the options, life options for 10, 11, 12-year-olds in Ciudad Juarez with the life options for Chiapas, you'll see why you have to be in Ciudad Juarez. And I think that that's the message that we have. We really have to switch from a repression program not only to a prevention strategy, but move all the way into an anticipation strategy. And to get that to work, to get the federal funds to work, to get all of us involved, not only in this targeted intervention strategy, but we have to change the mindset. And what do I mean by that? I think that the absorptive capacity of Ciudad Juarez is tremendous. We have 42 schools now on the federal government program that have, these are basic education schools. This is 42 out of 1,000 schools that have an after-school program. I mean, we can absorb much more than that. I mean, talk about helicopters and intelligence expenditures. Juarez can absorb much more than that. But the implementation capacity of Ciudad Juarez has reached the level where you have some organizations trying to do everything because they're the only organizations that are working with the most marginalized kids. So what has to change is the mindset of it's the government's responsibility to it's our responsibility. And I think that is taking place. I have a rather sad story. About a year ago today, a lady who was, a couple lost their 21-year-old kid. He called on the phone, said, Mom, somebody's following us. They're starting to shoot at us. Just remember that I love you. And then he disappeared. And as a result of her grief, she realized that, geez, I spent 21 years dedicated to my son. Everything that he needed, he wanted, the love, attention, education, etc. It was for my son. And I realized that I really should have been taking care of those other two kids that were actually shooting at him. So the realization that it's not the government's problem, that it's all of our problem, will expand that implementation capacity. I mean, there are young social entrepreneurs all over the city. Our advisory board for Youth Work Mexico is La Red de Agrupaciones Juveniles. We meet with them weekly. There's a lot of great work. So what we have to do is integrate into Youth Work Mexico a communication strategy, try to get the right stories out, work with the media. There's a lot of positive things that are taking place that need to get out. Besides that, in terms of steps 2 and 3, and I'll be really brief on this given the time constraint, we're working with the Paso del Norte group in terms of they have a umbrella agreement with Manpower. We're doing the labor market assessment, but again, not only what's going on in Ciudad Juarez, what are the jobs of the 21st or 22nd century, but looking at it on a regional and global competitiveness perspective, taking a look at El Paso, taking a look at Las Cruces, and seeing as a region, where are the gaps? It's not only a labor market assessment, but it's also taking a look at what kind of vocational training programs, university programs, or other job training programs are being implemented, and where are the gaps with the actual jobs that are taking place. I think the challenges are just tremendous. It's not only that we've lost 90,000 maquila jobs but this was basically because of the economic downturn. We've already regained in the past 18 months 30,000 of those. But more than that, I think it's the small businesses that have closed down, the family-owned businesses, close to 8,000 family-owned businesses, which represented close to 50% of first employment for young kids of the El Barrio, was at the panaderia, tapiceria, gomeria, at the little shops. They're closed. They're being extorted by the gangs and mafia. So what are those opportunities for young kids? Entrepreneurship will definitely play a very strong component in whatever employability program that we designed this year. Life skills will have to be integrated into that and into our safe spaces, from self-esteem to a life plan to communication strategy, dispute resolution, and maybe even start talking about peace building itself, because conflict transformation, it's not a question of the social safety net or el rezago social. It has reached, the violence has reached a level where we have to change the paradigm, so to speak. So in terms of some final reflections, indeed, this is a great opportunity to go into a participatory type of development framework, the type that's being implemented and tried maybe for the first time in Mexico's history. This is a tremendously paternalistic government traditionally, and so now we have these dialogues, we have citizen stables, et cetera, so this is a tremendous progress. Youth as a resource, as a solution rather than as a problem, another very important reflection. I really think that gangs have a tremendous amount of social capital that really, we're talking about one Azteca or one artista asesino within the whole barrio, the gang of the barrio. The rest of the gang can switch to become, and we've seen this happen in Ciudad Juarez, music producers and video production. We have Colectivo Zarape, which used to be a gang. Now they're, a tremendously progressive youth group working in the industry, in the legal industry. So there's a lot of things that have to take place. I think one of, if I could refer you, the way that the cartels and they operate through a culture of fear, of course, and what Zygmunt Bauman might have called el miedo líquido, or liquid fear. We have to switch that fear into the moral imagination, or what John Paul Lederich calls the moral imagination, and try to find the best in ourselves and create a future of peace builders in a city of violence. So I'm pretty optimistic. I know that the strategy that USAID has developed over the past 5-6 months has finally been approved by the ambassador in Mexico, and one of the three strong areas will be youth, and we're there to work with all the partners in terms of making sure that we do see youth as the present and not just the future, and we are able to work with them to produce the social change that Juarez requires. We're also hoping to move to Tijuana. We've been requested to go to Monterrey. As things get better in one place, they will just start other places. So we have to be prepared with tested models, and I think that given the fact that we're in 74 countries with over 200 partners, we have some tested models and in high-risk areas that can be readily adapted to those realities. So I'll leave it there and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Carlo. And turning now to our third speaker, Lucinda Vargas. And I think you have a PowerPoint here.
I'll mess up with that remote. Just
I know, I wasn't.
Buenas tardes, or to some of us it's still morning probably because of the time zone. I've titled the presentation The Indispensable Pillar of Strengthening Civil Society in Mexico, and I'm going to focus, of course, on Juarez and what I call the against all odds citizen participation in Juarez for obvious reasons. The first initiative or example of citizen participation I'd like to bring to your attention is the Juarez Strategic Plan. Juarez does have a long-term comprehensive development strategy. It was produced or published in 2004. It was produced through an inclusive participatory process, meaning citizens gave input into the planning process, and it's comprehensive. What we call in Spanish, it just sounds nicer, desarrollo integral. It contemplates all dimensions of development, not just economic, social, etc. Obviously, the ultimate goal of such a strategy would be to improve substantially the quality of life of all Juarenses. So we think that a key strength, therefore, of the plan is that indeed it was able to bring in any number of community forces. All sectors were represented in the process. Over 14,000 people participated in this planning process, so that we could say that such a plan then would reflect a citizen's agenda of sorts. Like I said, it was published in the fall of 2004, and we have our summary in a document we call La Propuesta, Trabajando por el Juárez que Queremos. For those of you who know Spanish, that has a double meaning. I won't go into that. So the bottom line here is that after 2 years' worth of process, we did produce this tangible document, but it was to sort of set the course to take in terms of development. This is the shared vision we came up with. I won't read it for you. This is a very famous geographical sort of landmark in Juárez. But the document is available in the website and includes the vision, of course, which is here, and I don't intend for you to be able to read that, but the significance of this graphic is that the document, besides articulating a shared vision and the strategic directions, also goes into sub-strategies and actual projects, the ones I have up here, which we call the engines of change. So if we did indeed pursue this comprehensive development approach to how we could improve as a city, then you're going to see projects in all areas, whether it's education, culture, economics, urban development, etc. Some of these projects all had a very good start in terms of when we started the implementation stage, but we did try to focus on just out of 80 potential projects on 4 or a couple per strategic direction in order to keep true to the comprehensive development approach. So we did start the implementation stage of such a project with the projects you see on the screen here. In terms of the second one, for instance, that's a program aimed at addressing urban poverty. In terms of education, Museo del Niño, and culture, it's a program a project that's barely coming to fruition. But I can mention or go into detail into any one of these projects and ultimately tell you stories of how these projects were either stymied, not fulfilled appropriately, totally canceled, derailed, and maybe some with a measure of success 7 years later. Which is what made us think, well, why would such a strategic plan that's got such huge citizen endorsement and participation not be thriving? The citizen task forces that were built to produce the details out of these projects were doing their fair share of the work. These task forces included government officials, and they, of course, were also trying to come on board, or were saying that they were on board, but ultimately they simply got either derailed, postponed, etc. So a reflection we did in after 2 years or a year and a half's worth of implementation was go back to our vision, and we noticed that we were ignoring a very key component of our stated vision. We have the strategic directions over here, but then we have also what we call transversal policies. And one of them was the need to focus on a new model of governance if we are to move forward in any one strategic direction. We also stated that unless we also focus on eliminating the problem of public safety and impunity, recall this is 2004. This is not the height of the violence that we saw at the start of 2008, but certainly we did already have security and public safety issues in Juárez. So we then got a reality check when we went back to our reflection and said, well, we were probably naive thinking that with such a formidable planning tool, and having convinced the politicians and having all society kind of come together in the implementation stage, thinking that this would move forward. But sure enough, when I say and hopefully it's not with too much cynicism, that the projects were either derailed, stymied, postponed, transformed, or whatnot. It was because the citizens' agenda was divorced from the politicians' agenda. They would say yes to the projects, but ultimately cancel funds, not produce the funds, and not come through with it. So we lived the problem of not having the appropriate model of governance to actually force things to happen appropriately. So we then said, well, we therefore have to work on governance. And we, this was our thesis, and actually it's our mandate, because it's stated in our vision, that unless we improve the model of governance, being that it is a necessary condition to move forward, we're not going to progress in any one of the strategic development, strategic directions of the development plan. So we, in order to tackle such a formidable subject as governance, we developed a manifesto to see how we would go about it. And in this manifesto, we established 7 principles as to what was behind this whole concept of governance, which perhaps to a U.S. audience, when you see the 7 principles, are common sense elements that you should see working in any given society: respect for the law, citizens aware of their rights and respectful of their obligations, citizen participation in the formulation and implementation of public policies, evaluation of the efficiency, efficacy, and quality of public sector functions and service, professionalization of public sector functions. I heard with envy Denise's comments as to California trying to engage public sector officials on the Mexican side to professionalize public sector functions and not have your compadre be running the planning department and have the city go in the direction of the compadre's interests, and rather have the city's citizens' interests in mind. So such basics as having the technical people heading the key departments in any given location is lacking in Mexico. Then we have transparency. We used to call it elimination of corruption. I still call it that. But that offended politicians because they would refuse to accept that there was such a thing happening in Mexico. So we sort of used a synonym: transparency, integrity being the synonym, not transparency, and accountability. And then we said we have to start by having the civic and public administration officials be the examples of this sort of new approach to governance. Obviously, this was not really, appealing to the government authorities, especially because they thought we were really sort of just pointing the finger in one direction. But really, if you look at any one of these 7 principles, but especially all of them together, we're talking about promoting the rule of law. So if you promote any one of these principles, especially all of them together, you will have a solid rule of law. And one thing that we like to say in Plan Estratégico de Juárez is that crime and violence in Juárez is not a problem or the problem. It's but a manifestation or consequence of the real problem, which is lack of rule of law or weak institutions or non-existent institutions that are supposed to guarantee us the rule of law. Any country, and this is a country-specific statistic, not Juárez-specific statistic, that has a 98% rate of impunity, tells you that you do not have rule of law. Which is why I really like that one of the pillars in the Mérida 2 initiatives has to do with strengthening the rule of law, pillar 2. So we call this project El Pacto, and we, in order to be very clear about what we mean with governance, have established that this is a two-way street. It's about government and it's about society, or ciudadanía, the citizenry. Each of us doing our part in a co-responsible fashion in moving governance forward. So the first thing we have had to do is educate that this is not solely about sort of accusing government not doing its share, but a society that has been perhaps passive in allowing government structures to really undo whatever the citizens have established that needs to happen. So we have 3 principles in El Pacto: say in Spanish, act, participate, and demand. I mean, these are basics of civics that we think are fundamental in order to get citizens truly engaged in the civics of their community, the affairs of the community. And we say, you don't have to convert yourself into some sort of activist. You just have to act within the micro world that's at your disposal disposal so that you can then from there start doing the actions that make you accountable and start to make your public sector officials accountable. And more than anything, exigir. I think it was Carlo who said that, yes, Mexico is a very paternalistic society. A lot of people still dare not question the politicians. They're seen as God almost because they act as like they are God, or like, sort of emperors at times. A lot has changed ever since we had the alternancia or more than one party sort of governing the country. But there's that timidness in the citizenry to really call people into account, meaning the public servants. And we have to remind them that they're servants. They're called public servants for a reason. They're at the service of the citizens. But this is a sort of social contract that we ask people to sign. I won't read it. But bottom line behind the pacto is really strengthening civil society, because we think that a strong civil society, which is active, vigilant, and demanding, should be the counterforce to the current state of affairs in that co-responsibility relationship with government. Now, one thing that we would try to do when talking to the government official is to say that a model of good governance was not something that we were coming up as a whim to sort of be, annoying to them. But, good governance makes sense in terms of a broader sort of development goal. And I personally would use a lot of world development work that has been done in terms of what I call the bottom line of development, raising per capita income. I mean, there's work that's been done that the stronger your rule of law, the higher your per capita income. So in order to, again, have those external entities, I believe it was my colleague from the president's office who said it takes an external institution to sort of endorse what you're doing in order for others to take heed and not have it derailed or even, have a certain party label put on the work that you're doing, which has happened to us. El Pacto has come up with all these different, with all this this model of how to engage citizens, and there's different activities under each of these sort of tracks of action. I'm just going to mention some highlights. In the Formación Ciudadana, capacity building education, there's a couple of programs. One is with, in fact, the Culture of Lawfulness program that was mentioned in the morning. So that is one, and indeed the official did mention that one was starting in Juárez. So we're starting to do work with that particular entity. In Activación Ciudadana, or citizen activation, it's the best I could do in translating it, and not all of this is translatable in my view. But we were able to, in the Todos Somos Juárez framework, introduce a governance, I think you were calling it councils, no? Citizen councils? Working groups, thank you. Hopefully that's still working. No, I'm a member, of course, but I think it no sesiona tan frecuentemente como los otros, no? Sorry, I just had to say that. It doesn't have as frequent a meeting because of its nature, obviously. But it was a big deal that the dynamics that were already in place in terms of focusing on social actions, we were still able to convince the leadership of Todos Somos Juárez that an element that's transversal to all of those actions actually working was the governance element. Any one of those actions that is not implemented correctly, it's not guarded, monitored appropriately, especially by the citizens, and calling into account public officials who then have to truly fulfill the expectations, recognizing the reality that none of this is going to work overnight, then you might have, again, a fractured system at the end of the day. So we thought, this is a transversal element that needs to be put in place as well. But things like, even the one I haven't read, Presencia en el Cabildo, here in the United States, in local government, you get to elect your local officials, like your city representatives. In Juárez, it's like in high school. The president of the school, puts in all his sort of core of buddies that are going to be either the secretary, the treasurer, the cabildo, the city. ¿Qué es el equivalente? The city council is not elected, but they're individuals that accompany the president as part of the winning party ticket. So none of these individuals are actually accountable on a per sub-district basis in the city. So we have pushed for that to change so that we can bring any one of them into accountability. And one thing we're trying to do is just show up at every council meeting. And we're kind of like a gadfly because they're not used to citizens just showing up to listen to what is taking place, which I think in the U.S. Citizens have every right even to speak in those meetings. Contraloría Social, the best I could do in translating it is kind of like a citizen watch sort of approach as to what is happening. We have, initiatives in transparency. We have a system of indicators that we're developing, also with the help or funding of USAID, simply to monitor how we are doing in terms of progress or lack thereof. We also keep a continuous sort of link with the community in terms of continuously informing the community as to what is happening in the city or not happening in terms of the real issues, the structural issues. Are things getting derailed without us noticing in terms of having the citizens truly be effective in how they are, in theory bringing us on board, but then in practice we ultimately do not actually have strength. One thing that we do is always publish the decisions of the regidores, that's what we call the city council people, with their photos and what they said yes to and no to. And that has been somewhat effective because then you really visibilize or expose those regidores that voted yes to a multi-million-dollar investment project of a road that makes no sense for the citizens, but it has everything to do with the interests of the mayor. Sorry, these things happen constantly. So, el camino real, no? So this is the project of indicators. We just started it in March. By September, we're to produce the first State of the City report. Again, the logic behind it is that we need to measure and evaluate progress, but in a very sort of rigorous, professional, systematic, and reliable fashion in order to see if we're truly progressing or not progressing. And have it be also done through a citizens in an institutional citizens context, so that the citizens take hold of this and buy into it, so that ultimately the citizens are the ones that are running this, and nobody can say that the indicators are focusing in one direction or another for anybody's particular interest. Other citizen groups or initiatives, like one of my colleagues said, there's a lot of social entrepreneurs in Juarez, and you find them continuously. These are just a very quick sample. Comité Médico Ciudadano. I like their slogan. Peace is won through participating. They're very much engaged as intermediaries for citizens. Citizens tend to, this is their philosophy, trust doctors. Doctors are very trustworthy figures, I guess universally, but then because citizens are afraid to denounce, and that was brought up earlier, then this citizens group of doctors have offered themselves or their NGO as kind of like the conduit for these reporting of crime, so that they're the ones that then ultimately report the crime. Juarenses por la Paz is another group. There's groups from the maquila industry. There's a group called, the first one, Ciudadanos por una Mejor Administración Pública. This is a group that's been very insistent in monitoring the performance of public officials. They have an interesting initiative. I won't go into it. Another group is called Juárez Sí, Propuesta y Seguimiento Ciudadano. Mesa de Infancia focuses on children. Campaña Escúchame, Hazlo por Juárez. That's just to give you sort of a quick sense of, example after example of citizens at work and trying to get engaged. This is another one of the newer ones. Juárez Competitiva, Juárez la comunidad que queremos. It's trying to imitate what Tijuana did last year in terms of having the city showcase its strengths to itself first and then to the world. It's a set of activities for this coming October. It's now turning into a sort of movement, sort of trying to create a sort of Juárez Renaissance, and it's again comprehensive. It's not just focusing on business activities, but they're developing the movement is getting developed as we speak. An interesting component is that El Pasoans are participating, and more at the citizens level, rather than, yes, the public officials are involved, but it's been incredible what solidarity has emerged in terms of citizens wanting to participate in this initiative in this very immediate binational context. I'm towards the end here. Just a note on resiliency. It's a word that kind of has bothered me a bit just because of the reflection that I have here on the screen. And how should resiliency be interpreted? Yes, indeed, Juarenses. I'm from Juarez. We're known as being indomitable is another word that has been assigned to us. But does resilient mean having a high tolerance or high level of resistance? And would that be then to the current state of affairs, which nobody wants in any given community? Is it really laudable to sort of bounce back from such a state? In my view, that's really not to be applauded. That's if you just sort of resist and bounce back to the same status quo, then I would think there's something wrong with us. I would prefer to see resiliency as a citizenry that resists going back to the status quo, demanding structural change and addressing the more foundational issues that make for a better society, so that we create that force that I was referring to earlier, to not accept the conditions that landed us in the crisis to begin with. Finally, another program that Juarez, of course, has been referred to in the morning is the Todos Somos Juarez initiative. The best thing about this project, obviously, it's the name. Todos Somos Juarez. And the more lasting sort of outcome is an intangible that my colleagues in the earlier referred to in terms of never had there been such interaction and sort of dialogue in terms of citizens, just raw citizens, with the nation's top officials. So that in itself, if that is lasting and it produces changes for structural on the structural elements that need to happen, I think aside from everything that's happening on the specific social action programs, this is going to be a good thing. But then Todos Somos Juarez, I like the title, not because I'm from Juarez, but because it is a microcosm of what is happening in the rest of Mexico. So it's the national reality, what might work in Juarez, what might ultimately be bundled in Juarez in terms of all the different elements that have been brought up earlier today, is what the country Mexico needs. Thank you.
I want to thank all of our panelists, and we have time for maybe about 10 minutes of questions. So I'd like to open the floor for questions here in front.
I'm Jamie Shoemaker. I'm independent. My question is sort of goes back to what Denise brought up as far as the border really being sort of a blurry area. Anyone who's lived down there, especially, I can only speak from living in Southern California, it's not like when you cross that imaginary line that suddenly things are different and you're in a whole new world. So is there any sort of implementation and coordination of the programs on both sides of the border? And can some of these programs really succeed if they aren't addressed on the United States side as well as the Mexico side? With shared cultural values as far as things like education, environmental protection. I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit.
Denise,
I don't know about some of the other ones or how they're doing there. I mean, I think that is what locals have tried to do. We've done it a lot. Our biggest successes have been in sort of the environmental areas where we've been able to do that, except for when the federal government comes along and plants a fence in the middle of your eco project, right? But other than that, and they did it by waiving all the environmental laws ever known to man, because locally we could have managed it with environmental law, but and so we have the Gulf. But we have done things with the river, and we have done things with waste tires, and we have done things with both all our rivers flow north, so the New River cleanup. I mean, Beck and Nad Bank works sometimes, and we do have sewage treatment plants and all along the border in areas that have been a huge benefit to these communities. We do try to do more of that. We actually have, I think, the first California, Baja California, we now have a cross-border master plan for crossings and such. We were the first ones to do it on a binational basis. Sandag, Tijuana have done we have matching we do our planning sorted together. We've gotten further along that. And it sort of goes to something somebody else said earlier, but you can't impose these things either on and it isn't a matter of well, this is the better way to do things. But what our experience is we just show folks what we do. And you take it and adapt it and do whatever. And so now we're starting to see, frankly, really interesting development. But Tijuana, Rosarito, and Tecate are trying to sort of form something that looks like Sandag, because they figured out they can do better transportation planning if the three of them do it together, the way Sandag does for 18 cities. And so it's all about those sort of experiential ones. That's the ones where we've seen that. I don't know where else. Planning, we've done a little bit. We're getting better at it. But
Yeah, and the border master plan process is one that's also
was huge.
happening in other parts of the border.
Yeah.
I mean, the Arizona-Mexico Commission, which is based, focuses on the Arizona-Sonora area, but you also have that in the Laredo, Nuevo Laredo area and Brownsville, Matamoros. So you're starting to see those kinds of processes working at the local level and then coordinating with the relevant federal agencies. So I think there was a question back there.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Ruth Samuelson. I'm a contributor to Fox News Latino, and I'm actually based in Mexico City. I'm just here on a visit. I had a question for Carlo. There hasn't been much discussion today about the eastern border around Tamaulipas, and you hear a lot about forced recruitment in that area. And I was curious in Ciudad Juarez, when you're working with youth and trying to get them to go on to escuelas secundarias and get them employment. I mean, how much is forced recruitment an issue? That's basically it.
Probably just as much as it may be in Los Angeles, and there are some family ties with regard to some gang membership that force the issue. Definitely, other issues of crime like human trafficking, what is taking place with regard to medical body parts. Crime has a way of finding its outlets once you start putting the clamp down on its traditional roles. So yes, you do see kids at a very earlier age being patrulleros, 8, 9, 10-year-old lookouts, and sicarios from 10, 11, 12. So how forced are they? I won't speculate, but definitely when you see the human trafficking that has taken place with the migrational patterns coming from Central America through Mexico, and you've seen the type of forced recruitment of Guatemalans, Hondurans, et cetera, and that it does trouble. It is very worrisome. In Ciudad Juarez, you don't see that at the neighborhood level at all. But we have programs in Reynosa, Matamoros, Intra 21 programs or employability programs, and we have a hard time monitoring them because they're just very difficult to get to. It's really a very very violent situation. But I'm not sure if I answered, but we don't, on a day-to-day trinchera at the trenches, don't see that forced recruitment taking place for young kids in terms of gang membership.
I think there was another question on the right-hand side here, or no? Any other questions? Yeah, I think we tired everybody. Eric, you want to close?
Just a final. Whoa, sorry. Just hand me the mic. Just a final word to thank our panelists, the Council of State Governments for their support for this work, all of you for coming today. I hope you've availed yourself of some of the papers and work that's out on the table. Leave us your card if you're not getting our announcements. I think there's a little bit of lunch out there for folks. Please help yourself. And thank you all for being patient and sitting through this fascinating discussion.